The town of Graymore was shrouded in a fog so thick that it seemed to swallow light whole. The moon hung low, a ghostly eye watching over the narrow, winding streets. Few dared to walk them at night, for rumors of the shadow had crept into every whispered conversation, every tremulous bedtime story. They said the shadow knew your name, and once it called out to you, there was no escaping its grasp. One fateful evening, as the fog curled around the lampposts like tendrils of some great beast, young Eliza sat by her window. Her fingers toyed nervously with the lace of her nightgown as she listened to the eerie silence. The town had been unusually quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of something terrible. Eliza's mother had warned her, just like all mothers warn their children, never answer when you hear your name called in the dark. But Eliza was a curious soul, and tonight, her curiosity outweighed her fear. She leaned closer to the window pane, peering into the abyss beyond. The air was cold and still, and the only sound was the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. Suddenly, a voice, barely more than a whisper, drifted through the darkness. "Eliza!" Her heart pounded in her chest. Could it be? The stories of the shadow were just tales to frighten children, or so she had thought. Yet the voice was unmistakable, calling to her with a gentle, almost hypnotic tone. She knew she shouldn't respond, but an invisible force seemed to draw her closer to the window. She opened it slightly, the chill air biting at her skin. "Eliza," the voice called again, more insistent this time. She couldn't help herself. "Who's there?" she whispered into the night. The fog swirled and parted, revealing a figure cloaked in darkness. It was neither man nor beast, but something otherworldly, its form shifting and flickering like a shadow cast by an unseen fire. The figure's eyes, or where eyes should have been, glowed with an eerie light. "I am the shadow," it said, its voice a chorus of whispers. "And I know your name." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The tales had been true. The shadow was real, and it had come for her. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs were frozen in place, her voice trapped in her chest. The shadow moved closer, its presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Why have you come?" she managed to stammer. "I come for those who seek to know," the shadow replied, its voice echoing in the stillness. "You sought the truth, and now you must face it." The figure stretched out a hand, and Eliza felt an icy grip tighten around her heart. The room darkened, the light from the moon fading into nothingness. The shadow's grip grew stronger, pulling her into the abyss. She struggled, but it was futile. The darkness consumed her, and she felt herself falling, deeper and deeper, into an endless void. Eliza awoke with a start, drenched in cold sweat. She was back in her room, the fog still pressing against the window. Had it all been a dream? She hoped so, but the memory of the shadow's touch lingered, sending shivers down her spine. She tried to shake off the feeling and went about her day, but the sense of foreboding never left her. Days turned into weeks, and the fog never lifted. The townspeople grew more anxious, their whispers more urgent. Eliza couldn't escape the feeling that the shadow was still watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She avoided the window at night, but the voice continued to haunt her dreams, calling her name with that same hypnotic tone. One night, as the fog wrapped itself around the town like a suffocating blanket, Eliza heard the voice again. This time, it was inside her room. Eliza? She turned slowly, her eyes widening in terror. The shadow stood at the foot of her bed, its form even darker than the night itself. You cannot escape me, it said. I know your name, and now I know your fears. Eliza tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow's presence grew stronger, enveloping her in a darkness so complete that it blotted out everything else. She felt herself being pulled into the void once more, but this time there was no waking up. The darkness was her new reality, and the shadow was her constant companion. The townspeople of Greymoor never saw Eliza again. Her disappearance became another whispered tale, a warning to all who dared to seek the truth. The fog eventually lifted, but the memory of the shadow lingered, a dark specter that haunted the town's collective consciousness. And every now and then, on foggy nights, a voice could be heard, calling out to the curious and the unwary. I know your name. The town had become a place where fear was as thick as the fog itself. Parents tightened their grips on their children's hands, and windows were closed long before nightfall. Life continued, but an undercurrent of unease ran through every waking moment. The marketplace, once bustling with cheerful chatter, now echoed with the murmurs of the fearful and the watchful glances of those who had heard the tales. On the outskirts of town, an old hermit named Marcus lived in a dilapidated cabin. Marcus was known for his extensive knowledge of the supernatural, and many believed he had once been a sorcerer. Some villagers, desperate for answers, dared to visit him. They found him sitting by a flickering candle, his eyes sharp and intense. The shadow you speak of, Marcus began, his voice low and gravelly, is no ordinary specter. It is a manifestation of the deepest fears and darkest secrets of those it haunts. It feeds on curiosity and the desire for knowledge, growing stronger with each name it learns. The villagers listened in rapt silence as Marcus continued. There is only one way to break its hold. A sacrifice must be made a willing soul who confronts the shadow and speaks its true name. Only then can the cycle be broken and the town freed from its grip. Word of Marcus's revelation spread quickly, but finding someone willing to make such a sacrifice was no easy task. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to wane. The fog thickened, and the voice of the shadow grew louder, more insistent. It was then that Eliza's younger brother, Thomas, stepped forward. He had been tormented by nightmares of his sister's fate, and could no longer bear to see the fear in his parents' eyes. He resolved to face the shadow and end the terror once and for all. Under the cover of night, Thomas made his way to the heart of the forest, where the fog was densest and the darkness most impenetrable. He carried with him a piece of parchment with the name Marcus had whispered to him, the true name of the shadow. With each step, his resolve grew stronger, even as the icy fingers of fear wrapped around his heart. Thomas! The voice called out to him, a chilling whisper that sent shivers down his spine. He hesitated but pressed on. I know your name, he whispered, clutching the parchment tightly. The darkness around him seemed to thicken, and the shadow appeared before him, its form shifting and writhing like a living nightmare. You dare to face me? It hissed, its eyes glowing with malevolent light. Thomas took a deep breath and stood his ground. I do. I know your name, and I will speak it. The shadow lunged at him, but Thomas held the parchment high, the name written in bold, trembling letters. Your name is Nephthys, he shouted, his voice echoing through the trees. The shadow recoiled, its form flickering and distorting. A wail of agony filled the air as the darkness began to dissipate and the fog lifted, revealing the pale light of the moon. Thomas watched as the shadow faded into nothingness, its power broken. Exhausted but triumphant, Thomas returned to the village, where the townspeople greeted him with awe and gratitude. The curse had been lifted, and the memory of the shadow became a tale of bravery and sacrifice. But even as life returned to normal, a sense of unease lingered. The fog might have lifted, and the shadow might have been banished, but the townspeople knew that darkness always lurked just beyond the light, waiting for the curious and the unwary. And so, the warning remained, a testament to the power of fear and the courage it takes to face it. Never answer when you hear your name called in the dark.